Spider-Man Hostile Takeover. Chapter 17. He was in the lab when his phone buzzed. It was MJ, proposing that they try again to have that talk. How about the sandwich place, he said. For the sake of consistency? You don't fool me, she said. You just like their pastrami. Guilty. Oh, how'd the interview go? Really well. The excitement was obvious in her voice. I think he likes me. This is one of those times, he told himself, when I need to take a moment to consider what I'm going to say. Then he started talking without doing any more considering. MJ, we're playing with fire, he said. There are only two ways to push up against a guy like him. You either co-op, or you're destroyed. Or you beat him, she said. Aren't you trying for door number 3? I have certain advantages. So do I, she said. Peter. She cut herself off. You know what? Let's save this for later. I don't want to fight with you right now. I don't want to fight either, he said. But I can't just sit here and let you put yourself in danger. You don't let me do anything, she said sharply. I don't need your permission, Peter. That's not what I'm saying, he replied. He couldn't win. I feel like you're twisting my words to score points rather than hearing me. But you're right. We won't talk about it now. We'll discuss it later, without arguing. We won't argue if you don't say dumb things, she said. And they set a time. See you then. Having a crush at work, especially on an older guy, was a bad idea. Having a crush on an older guy with a girlfriend was a worse idea. Anika decided that she wouldn't have a crush on Peter anymore. That was her decision, and she was sticking to it. That didn't mean she couldn't be friends with him. There was nothing that said you couldn't be friends with an older, smart, funny, and possibly cute guy you worked with. In fact, it would be an effort for them not to be friends. Clearly they were on the same wavelength, had a similar sense of humor, many of the same interests. They got along great. It wasn't her fault that he already had a girlfriend who obviously didn't get him, or appreciate him, or want to be supportive when he needed it. At least that was what it sounded like when she accidentally listened in on his phone conversation. She was checking on a neural simulator they ordered to see if it had been shipped. Peter was sitting on the other side of the terminal she'd been using. The right thing to do would have been to walk away. Eavesdropping was not admirable behavior. As she wrestled with a conundrum, she heard what she heard. That done, there was no putting that toothpaste back in the tube. So now she had to figure out how best to act, knowing that his girlfriend was totally wrong for him. Anika chewed on it all day. Most of her tasks were menial, which left her mind free to go this way and that. At times it came back to the work they were doing, which was pretty amazing. She had a great aunt who lost a leg in a car accident years ago. Her aunt was close to 80 now and still got around pretty well with her prosthetic. But Anika loved to imagine what the lab's research would mean for people like her. The ability to move with the same ease and flexibility that she'd had before the accident. That was some seriously life-changing stuff. She was thrilled to be part of it. A lot of what she was doing was data entry and fact-checking, but she also helped Peter run some tests. They'd had a number crunching session when there'd been a problem with one of the formulae for the synthetic neural relay. Anika had been the one to figure out where a number had been transposed. A simple clerical error that had been throwing everything off. It would be one thing if she spotted the error through proofreading, but she deduced where the mistake had to be and backtracked it to the source. Both Peter and Theodore had watched her do it, and they were both impressed. Anika could see herself working in the lab for a while, definitely for the rest of the year, and maybe longer if she decided to take some time off before applying to grad school. There was no way she could stick around all the time if things weren't comfortable with Peter, and that meant being honest and being his friend. That seemed perfectly reasonable to her. Maybe she was sort of stalking him too. But if she knew she was doing something sort of creepy, did it mean she wasn't really being creepy? That seemed to make sense. She was just exploring her feelings. That was the best term for it. Late in the afternoon, Peter headed for the door. Closing up a file she'd been finished with for 15 minutes anyhow, she grabbed her backpack so she could leave at the same time. "Good work today," he told her while they were waiting for the elevator. "You saved us a ton of headaches." "Anyone could have done it." She brushed some hair away from her eyes. "It didn't look that way to me," he said with a grin. "That was some crazy math wizardry there." She felt her cheeks burning. "Thanks." The elevator doors chimed open, and they stepped in. "No point hesitating," she told herself. "Just dive right in." "Look, I don't mean to, but I sort of overheard your fight with your girlfriend." "It wasn't really a fight," he said. "More of a disagreement with the side of vehemence." He laughed a little nervously. He probably wished this super awkward conversation wasn't happening. "In for a penny." "Well, I don't want a prize," she continued. "But if you need someone to talk to, I mean, we've already talked some, right? And it would be more like continuing to talk than starting a new conversation. I'm just saying that I'm a good listener. I'm also rambling, which I promise not to do if you actually talk to me about anything important." "Thanks, Anika," he said. "I appreciate it." He didn't sound like he appreciated it, though. He sounded like he was really uncomfortable and was desperate for the conversation to end. When the doors chimed open, he said goodnight and bolted off. Now she done it. Now he was going to be super uncomfortable around her. She wished there was some way to figure out the right approach, but she had no idea what that might be. If she had some insight, knew how things really were with his girlfriend, it would probably make things easier. But there was no way for that to happen. Unless they were going to the sandwich place, the one he mentioned. It was in Times Square. A fact-finding mission. Gathering data. This wasn't, she knew, the sort of thing normal people did. She certainly couldn't make a habit of it. But if it was just this once, and she never did it again, she figured she could live with herself. A one-time incident could be filed as enthusiastic rather than creepy. She waited a few minutes. The last thing she wanted was to run into him on the subway. Then, walking slowly so she would be on the train after his, she began her research. It had been a particularly contentious meeting with the neighborhood association. Not everyone was pleased with the idea of mixed-income housing, and it had required a great deal of self-control to keep from knocking heads together. Fisk's third-shift secretary hadn't yet arrived, or had gone to relieve himself or some other excuse, so he had no idea if there were any important messages. On top of that, Michael Bingham was in his office when he walked in. Fisk supposed he ought not to be surprised that a man who had nearly identical abilities to Spider-Man should be able to get past security. But this was a serious breach of protocol. It wasn't at all what Fisk had agreed to. If the man had been sitting and waiting patiently, that would have been one thing. It would have been outrageous. Certainly, but perhaps not beyond the pale. As it happened, Bingham was rifling through his desk drawers. "Wilson!" Bingham said as he looked up. He wore faded jeans and a tight t-shirt that showed off his physique. "I was wondering when you were going to show up." He took a handful of paper clips, slipped them into his pocket, and closed the drawer. "You'll want to sit at your desk, I guess. I don't know. I've never had a desk. But it seems like people like to sit at 'em." He nodded toward the big chair. Fisk approached him. He was so accustomed to intimidating people with his size, he hardly even noticed he was doing it anymore. But he noticed it now. This insignificant worm was attempting to assert his dominance over Wilson Fisk. It would have been laughable had Bingham not been so dangerous. It was important not to show too much concern. "What is it you want?" he asked as he lowered himself into his desk chair. "Just thought I'd drop in. he said, to give you a progress report. We don't really chat so much, and I guess maybe it's my fault. I'm not as social as a lot of you guys. People make me uncomfortable. Fisk simply stared, making a point of not inviting Bingham to sit. He made it a point of sitting anyhow. I'm not entirely certain this relationship is working to our mutual benefit, Fisk said. You've acted on several occasions without my consent. It may be time to rethink our terms. You can do all the thinking and rethinking you want, but I'm going to show you that phony who the real Spider-Man is. Keep your TV on tonight, Wilson. There's going to be some great entertainment. I haven't approved any action for tonight, Fisk replied, any more than I approve what happened at that construction site. What was the point of fighting him in that ridiculous outfit? And why there? That truly rankled Fisk. No one knew the building site was his property. It was registered in the name of a satellite company, but even the most complicated labyrinth of shell companies and LLCs could be unraveled by someone who had enough time and determination. How had Bingham lured Spider-Man there in the first place? How had he hired those henchmen? This project, though only just begun, already seemed to be spiraling out of control. It was a dry run, Bingham said. I wanted to make sure I could take him, but I wasn't ready yet to show the world that he ain't the real deal. Soon, they'll know, though. I'm Spider-Man. That's what they'll see. I think before you act again, Fisk said, you had better submit any plans you have for me for approval. Bingham leaned back again. We both know I don't work that way, Wilson, Bingham said. I'm a free spirit. I told you that from the beginning. Maybe you think I'm, I don't know, too loony to remember what we talked about, what we agreed. He twirled his finger around his ear. Maybe you don't think I'm playing with the full deck, and you can just say whatever you want. But it ain't how it works. Then why are you here? Fisk asked, his voice turning into a growl. Like I said, I wanted to let you know what was going on. He stood up quickly. Professional courtesy, let's call it. I could keep you from ever leaving this building. Bingham grinned again. You could try. He turned and moved toward the door. Stop! Fisk said. This can't continue. He needed to sound calm, even agreeable. If he pushed, Bingham would push back. Most people could be intimidated, but not everyone. If we are to be successful, we must work together. Bingham turned. I thought that's what we were doing. Then he kept going. He opened the office door and walked past Maya Lopez. She stopped in her tracks to watch him pass. Bingham put a hand alongside his mouth and cupped it. Good evening, miss, he said loudly, enunciating slowly. Then he cackled happily and made his way to the elevator. Fisk clenched his fist and observed Maya for a moment, holding his temper by dint of great effort. She watched the disgusting individual leave, then continue into his office and close the door. What was he doing here? She said. Who was he? Fisk said in a flat tone. That meant he didn't want the conversation to continue. He was clenching and unclenching his fists and blinking rapidly, all signs that he knew that he was losing his temper. He needed to get his situation under control. It didn't look congenial, she said. Are you sure you can trust him? I will decide that, Fisk snapped. His rage was a living thing beneath the skin, trying to break free. He had never let himself loose, not fully, around Maya. There had been some minor incidents, of course, but nothing serious. He could feel himself slipping, though. He could imagine his fist pounding down on his desk, breaking it in half while she looked on in horror. Maya was one of the few genuinely good things he had to show for his life. Not simply successful, but good. Her loyalty to him, her devotion, was like a testimony to what he hoped to achieve. Not this ridiculous business with giving apartments to poor people. That was just for show. It hardly mattered. All the handouts in the world wouldn't eradicate poverty. The only way the city would ever improve was with better leadership. Not elected fools like Osborne, but with real leaders. Fisk had done things in pursuit of this goal that had crossed lines from which he could not go back. Yet there were two people who saw him for who he really was. Vanessa, his wife, and Maya, who was not his daughter, but she was as close to it as anyone in this world. He did not like to let the beast loose while she watched. Something else troubled him. Something he had seen. How had Bingham known she was deaf? He turned to Maya. "That man who left my office," he said. "Have you had any dealings with him?" "I've reviewed his file," she said. "Nothing more." Fisk had no reason to doubt her, and yet... "If you have, tell me now," he said. "I will forgive you if you are honest. But if you hide the truth from me, then we will have difficulties. Tell me." Abruptly, he realized he was towering over her. He hadn't meant to approach her, to menace her. Now he took a step back. "Tell me," he said, this time more quietly. Maya shook her head. "I haven't," she said, her voice quavering. "I wouldn't." She sounded afraid. But of course she was afraid. She had seen him hurt people when he was like this. She had to fear that he might hurt her. If he lost control. He hated that. Even more than he hated that, had she answered the wrong way, he might have given her reason to fear. "I need to go," she said. "Then go," he told her, his voice controlled. "Close the door on your way out." He waited until she would be far away from his office. Then he looked at his desk. Fisk raised his fist. He should hold back. He should constrain himself. Then rational thought was gone, and he let his true nature take command.